Welcome everyone to this webinar on employer branding and recruiting in a time of crisis. I'm Marta Leah, and I am an enterprise sales director here at Fairygodboss. And for those of you that don't know who Fairygodboss is, we are the largest career community for women. So I like to say our job is really twofold. On the one side, we're here to elevate and empower women in the workforce through greater transparency. And on the flip side, we work with a lot of organizations to help them attract and engage diverse female talent. So in my role, I really work with a lot of our partners in understanding what their diversity and recruiting goals are, employer branding. And it's been a really interesting 6 months because I've been talking to hundreds of partners and really understanding how they've been impacted, whether they're going through layoffs or hiring, but also how the women in our community have been impacted. So excited to share some of those insights with you today. And I will be having this wonderful conversation with Alexandra Jackson, who, Alex, I'm going to call you Alex the whole time because that's kind of what we've gotten to know each other as, but I'd love to have you introduce yourself as well to everyone on the call.
Thanks, Marta. So I'm so happy to be here today. I'm happy to share my account of being a recruiter and HR professional during this time through the crisis. And, like you said, I'm an HR manager and a recruiter for EHE Life Extension Institute, and also the founder and owner of a career consulting firm called Hunter Gatherers LLC. I've been working for EHE for a little over a year now, but working in the HR field for a little over 5 years. I've worked in several industries from retail to data technology to now private healthcare. But this is my very first time navigating as an HR professional through a crisis, as it is for many, if not everyone on this call. So I'm glad we're having these conversations in order to learn from one another during this time.
So Alex, talking about navigating in a time of crisis, I have a few headlines up here, and I think this kind of sums up the last 6 months, right? A lot has happened. It's been unprecedented is a word I use, but I think that doesn't even touch what's happened. But I think we can talk about all of the different points here, but rather than thinking about it as a point of chaos, the way I think about it is an opportunity. And an opportunity for employer branding, HR, and recruiting leaders to really leverage what's happened and empower themselves to think about their future employee recruiting strategies and also employee engagement by getting in front of leadership in a way they never have before.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just a point, just an observation on this slide. I also have a background in psychology. I got my bachelor's and my master's in the field. A lot of these headlines are screaming fight or flight for me. And in a time of unrest of any kind, the anxiety is going to force us either to rise to the occasion, fight back and adapt, or freeze up and even revert to our old ways. And either reaction will be a determining factor for success for companies during a crisis. And I'm glad that we're going to get into that. We're going to talk about that and how to really be on the winning side of the scenario today.
So I think on the, going into the winning side of the scenario, a lot of the conversations I've had with partners in the last 2 years talks about diversity, equity, and inclusion. How do we recruit more diverse talent? And what I saw at the beginning of COVID was a lot of organizations putting those efforts on pause, just as they were reprioritizing what was happening. But then, with what's been happening over the last couple of months with the Black Lives Matter movement, those have kind of come front and center. But I think regardless of what's happening around us, what we've always seen is that as employer branding and HR professionals, your priorities on driving a more diverse workforce should always be front and center because of the fact that every bit of data, throughout the past 10, 20 years has shown that organizations that are more diverse are the ones that come out on top through recessions and crises. And I think that's where, this is your opportunity to really leverage that as you work with your leadership teams and just show it's not a nice to have, but really a business imperative to have a more diverse workforce.
Yes.
So Alex, I'd love to know, how has your organization been navigating the last 6 months and maintaining diversity as a priority?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been an eye opener for my company, I'm sure, as it has for many. I work for a healthcare company, and both of the crises in America, COVID-19 and the social injustices against minorities, have been magnified. And it has magnified the racial disparities in medicine and the need for equity in corporate spaces. So my company's actually been around since 1913, so that's over 100 years. And I'm definitely proud to say that with myself and this new generation of driven, educated, and diverse leaders, we're rolling out a more robust DEI program at EHE. I don't think you can have a successful DEI program without first educating employees on the topic and also incorporating it into your recruiting processes. And I know we'll talk about this a little bit later in our conversation, but I think it's very telling that for a lot of places, it took a crisis like the one that's happening right now to transform such a long-standing institution.
Yeah, and I think, as we go into more depth on this topic, I wanted to share a quick quote with everyone here. And this was something I read at the beginning of COVID, and it's stuck with me throughout. And it's really, if you care about diversity and inclusion, this is your time to shine. The way employees and candidates are treated today amid the crisis is a company's diversity and inclusion message for tomorrow. And this quote really leads us into the topic at hand, employer branding, recruiting in a time of crisis. And when I think about employer brand, I think in its simplest of terms, we've always thought about it as, what is your reputation as a place to work? A really deeper dive into your company culture for job candidates, and really looking at it in two ways: the quality, how attractive is your organization, and the visibility, how well known is your reputation among potential employees. We know we all live and work in a place where everything is public, whether it's Glassdoor reviews, social media. But the way we've traditionally seen employer brand and culture has had always a big shift on the workplace, right? What kind of office space are you working in? What are the perks? Will I have a mentor that I get to meet once a month and have coffee with? But now with COVID, that has quickly shifted, because a lot of us are not in the workplace in the same way as we used to be. Even if we are, we're practicing social distancing if we're in hospitals or in manufacturing floors. So where that shift has really taken the biggest change is on how are we approaching our current employees, who are really going to be our best reflection of who we are as our organizations, but then also potential candidates. And how are we showcasing who we are as organizations authentically and transparently? How are we really going about and showcasing how we're navigating the crisis during this time? So, Alex, I'd love to hear kind of a few of your tidbits on how can organizations be authentic and transparent at this time, since we've heard, a lot of companies doing it right, some doing it wrong.
Yeah, I think just to speak to the companies who are doing it right versus those who are doing it wrong, it all comes from actions, right? You can say you're rolling out a DEI program, but if there's no action behind it, then that's where you kind of fall short. But employers can be authentic and transparent in many ways. I think that the days of just displaying your company's values on its website are a thing of the past. People want more. They want to, like I said, see the actions behind your company's missions towards gender and racial equality. Some ways could be to highlight your company's demographics on their website. My last company did a very good job of doing that. Also displaying your executive team along with their bios on your website, as well as your social media, and making it very clear who your affiliated companies are and what other missions, charities, affinity groups that you support. These are becoming common data points that candidates are looking for when they're searching for a job, and it's great to just get ahead of it and kind of put that information in the forefront. In addition, like you were alluding to before, how our work environment looks is drastically changed right now during the crisis. I mean, obviously, look at all of us working from home right now. The questions from candidates are no longer, what's your work office culture like? We can't say we have free snacks. happy hours, game rooms. The CDC will come knocking on our doors if we say that too loudly. But instead they're asking, how did your company react to COVID? How did you treat your employees, and how are you continuing to support your employees as they work from home and as the world of work changes in general?
So those are really some of the key things you're seeing potential candidates asking.
Yeah,
really
absolutely.
those key things. Yeah. And I think getting ahead of it with that transparency is so critical. As you think about readjusting what's on your careers page and what you're broadcasting out on social career pages, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
So, when we think about authenticity and transparency, a lot of this we talked about, as employer branding and recruiters and HR leaders, we have this opportunity to get in front of leadership and kind of position ourselves in the way we want our organization to be seen.
Yes.
But that authenticity really comes from the leadership on down, and leadership plays such a critical role in what's the messaging we're putting out there. How do we want our organizations to be seen? And then really not going back to business as usual, but really leveraging the crisis as an opportunity to change the future of work. So is this something you've seen as well in your time, and how has your leadership kind of responded to what's been happening?
Yeah, so before I answer your question, I just want to point out as well that both crises, COVID and the racial unrest, have been catalysts to these changes in our workforce, right? So the move towards a more diverse workforce, work from home programs, creating a flexible work arrangement to make families a priority. These have all been conversations that we've had in discussion before, and maybe even executed to the beginning stages, but the crisis has forced everyone to create a more robust program or policies surrounding these topics, and to roll them out accordingly if they want to see their company survive, essentially. So, the message to leadership really is that the train has already left the station. It's just moving a lot quicker than expected. So you just have to get on board at this point. That being said, to answer your question, the universe does reward agile and strategic action. So my company has definitely executed on this by creating a home program for its employees for the foreseeable future. And since we are a preventive wellness company, we've created a safe at work program inclusive of the COVID-19 screening and tests for clients and employees. And as I mentioned before, we're launching a full DEI program this year in response to the social injustices we're seeing in the country. So again, like, that strategy and fast action has definitely worked in our favor.
Yeah, and I love the way you say it, that it's a catalyst, because so many of the conversations I've had over the last 2 years with a lot of HR leaders has been, we want this change to happen. Simple things like working from home. Not everyone can, and we understand that, right? If you're a nurse, if you're on a manufacturing floor in retail, but in those areas that can. And I think this is where we really think about, when we approach the future of work, the role that leadership plays. How are they listening to how different groups are being impacted? Whether you're a stay-at-home mom now and you also team of 5, but then also become a kindergarten and 3rd grade teacher. How do you adapt to that? Advocacy as well. How are we teaching teams to be culturally aware? It's great to put D&I training programs in place, unconscious bias training. But if we're not seeing that message resonated from the top down, it becomes very difficult to create action throughout the organization. And then finally, how are we embracing, adapting, and changing, like you said, really leveraging that time for that to happen? How do we use this new normal to help us advance those diversity efforts as we're thinking about employer branding and our recruiting strategy? I just think of the Silicon Valley area and everyone recruiting for tech talent. And typically tech companies tend to be less diverse, right? Because of the limited talent pool. Does this now opportunity working from home expand your talent pool across the entire US? So I guess one question for you, Alex, is what would be your suggestion if we come across leaders that maybe aren't as supportive to adapting to this future of work and changing?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, but I would actually say leaders, I wouldn't say that leaders fail to be supportive of these issues, right? I have to believe, if not just for my own sanity, that leadership and executives inherently want their employees to feel supported regarding these topics. I would say it may not be a priority. And that's where we as HR leaders have to be strategic, because we don't want to go back to business as usual, right? So we really have to be the change agents for the leadership's teams, because they are juggling, other priorities. They have bosses to answer to as well. So we want to really coax them and coach them. And we do that by making the value add very clear to leadership, as well as our executive teams, and connecting these changes to our bottom line, to the company's bottom line, right? So I'll use my own company as an example. So as we roll out the DI program, in healthcare, the greatest way that we can make impact is through eliminating racial and gender disparities in access to high quality healthcare. So it's not enough to just say we want to launch a DEI program. We have to make it relate to the business. We have to make it be impactful to our employees as well as our clients, and make it make sense for the bottom line, which for us would be providing preventive healthcare solutions to our clients. I think that has to be key if you really want leadership teams to listen, to do those 3 steps that you just mentioned, to listen, advocate, and then embrace and adapt to the change. And then once you get that buy-in, it should be that trickle-down effect that reaches all areas of your business.
Yeah, and so many of us, I mean, all of us are, whether, we think about our brand outside of just employer brand, we have a corporate brand that has a consumer, right? Whether it's patients, whether it's retail, and those consumers often are, whether you're on the B2C side selling a product or B2B side, you have to be reflective of that as well.
Exactly. In HR, you have to wear many hats. You have to have the business acumen. You have to cater to employees, potential and current.
And so, what I'd love to do now is share with everyone what employees and candidates want to see from you during this time. So Fairygodboss, we actually did our own survey 2 months ago on understanding what are organizations providing, as we think about employer brand and as we think about potentially recruiting future employees, but then also our current employees. What do they want to see from us, and what are we doing right? So I wanted to share a couple of tidbits of insights with you, and for anyone that wants to see the full study, message me on LinkedIn after, and I'll be happy to share that. But what's interesting is when we looked at what resources that employees are providing, a lot of it was very similar to what you'd expect, right? The flexible work schedules, access to telemedicine, which was so important as no one wanted to leave their home, online workout classes. So I think organizations that could adapt to that work from home culture have been doing it well. And providing those resources. So I guess for you, Alex, what have you adapted during this time to support your employees?
Yeah, well, we're definitely in line with the data that you have here, Marta. I mean, my company is offering remote work options for the foreseeable future. We offer additional FMLA, of course, per our state guidelines. We have great benefits that include telemedicine visits, which, by the way, are already had been fixed into our benefits plan pre-COVID. We offer an annual tuition reimbursement to all employees to continue their education. And of course, separately, my business, Hunter Gatherers, is offering career coaching, resume review, as well as mock interviews for those who are on the job hunt. So I'm really a 24-hour HR machine, Marta. But yeah, it's so important to have these resources in place, especially in a time of crisis.
Yeah. And as we think about the way we're messaging, we have to make sure that our current workforce is aware of all of this, because when they're talking about us externally and when we think about our brand, that's what is going to make us stand out as that employer of choice. But interestingly enough, what we also did was take a take on what do you wish your employer provided more of? And when I think about this data, at Fairygodboss, a lot of what we talk about is culture, right? Diverse candidates and women look for jobs very differently than, for example, men do. And when we think about the way look for jobs, it's the things that are most important to them. And when we think about culture, it's female role models. Who am I going to look up to at a company? What is my growth opportunity at this organization? How will they continue to support me? And what we've seen that our current community members are saying what they wish they saw more of is access to development opportunities and online learning. So even if you're in a remote work environment or a modified work environment, we see that these these current employees want to continue to be supported throughout their time. Also things like reimbursements for home offices. And as you think about your employer brand, the talk track and the messaging around what's most important should really factor a lot of these things into play, because more than ever, it doesn't matter that you're working from home and also managing childcare duties. You still want to know that your organization is going to help you build your career. So have you seen the way you change your talk track to candidates to reflect these things? You have. And has there been something that's stuck out to you more than ever? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that you asked this follow-up question in your survey. When I'm recruiting and interviewing, I always have the candidate's current job market experience at the top of my mind. So, you have to think about what resources they're going to be looking for during this period. For example, if you look at the job climate through the lens of a new graduate right now, their needs are really leaning towards career progression. They're not only looking for how can I land a job right now after college, but also looking at how they can keep a job through a recession. It's a scary thought, but it's what's on a lot of new grads' minds. I actually had an interview this morning where the candidate really wanted to talk more about next steps in his career. Learning and development, growth opportunities, even more so than the actual job that he was interviewing for. So just keeping that at top of mind. In addition, when there is a recession in the job market, it's extremely competitive. So the reality is that competition is even more so for female and minority job seekers. So a lot of my recruiting messages now are very focused on the diversity aspect, focused on learning and development, career growth, and definitely plugging benefits like the tuition reimbursement.
Yeah, and I think, all of that has been so critical. And as we kind of close out this webinar, it's when we think about our organizations and we think about how we adapt our employer brand during this time, and highlight who you are as an employer of choice, we really have to focus on those qualities that are most important to the type of talent that you want to recruit. And some examples of that are those female role models, because oftentimes, as a candidate, when I was looking for a job, I wanted to understand what it's like to be a female working at a specific company, but I couldn't find that information anywhere. Also, those benefits that support women, those succession plans, those training programs that are so key to growing their careers, and any other way you're supporting them should be really the focus of that messaging moving forward. And we've seen that the key way to do that is really authentically. Storytelling is a great way for everyone to do that. Your current employees are such an asset to you. And some of our partners on Fairygodboss have been doing that through just showcasing content on, how are some of the women working from home and, keeping their productivity up. And I think through these authentic storytelling, it creates that transparency, because no one will essentially sell your employer brand the way your own associates and employees will. And then so kind of closing this out, Alex, what's interesting in this final piece of data is a lot of people I've talked to have said, we're really nervous because we think talent might not want to switch jobs right now. It is a competitive marketplace for talent, but there is more talent in the market than ever. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, are candidates afraid, right? Because of what's happening. If they start a new job, will they get laid off, et cetera? But what we've actually seen is now more than ever, candidates are looking to switch careers and they're looking to switch jobs. A quarter responded that they're more likely now than even before COVID. And I think a large part of that is that culture play, and what organizations are doing to support you or not. So I guess for those of us that are actively recruiting and looking to recruit more diverse talent, as a closing point, what tips do you have on filling our talent pipelines?
Yeah, I actually have a few recommendations for recruiters and HR professionals on how to drive diversity through the recruiting process. So, first, you have to be able to access a diverse pipeline. So, making sure that your recruiting network is diverse. If you use a recruiting agency, make sure that you may use multiple diverse agencies, maybe women owned, Black owned, etc. Or if you do recruiting in-house, like we do at my company, um, make sure that you're creating relationships with different affinity groups, like just to name some well-known resources: Women in Tech, Girls Who Code, Out in Tech, companies like that. Uh, Second, overhauling your job description. So making sure that your opportunities are universally attractive. Review job criteria through a diverse lens and really try to get gender neutral language on your job descriptions. Um, Third, interview diversification. I think to tackle any blind spots in the hiring process, and make sure that you have like a third party interviewer to join the interview panel. They can be diverse, they can be from another department. Just make sure that you have like kind of that outside voice to help you with your decision making. And also make sure that your interviewers have gone through diversity and unconscious bias training. Right now, that really should be standard in any corporate setting, but just making sure that they have that knowledge before becoming an interviewer. And then lastly, just being open to outside counsel. There's no shame in saying that this is a new frontier for your company, whether that be, working from home, navigating new policies, rolling out a DEI program. Reach out to your diverse peers. Ask them what they're doing to drive diversity in the recruiting process. Ask them what mistakes they've made and what triumphs they've had. Try to learn from each other as much as possible, exactly the way that we're doing on this call right now.
And so thank you for sharing those tips. And I've learned so much from you in the last 25 or so minutes and the conversations we've had. So, I think to close it out before we take some questions, I think for everyone on this call, Fairygodboss has a ton of free resources, from webinars you can share with your current employees to groups to navigating the new normal and content. So please, we're here, we have tons of free resources. And if you need help with navigating, how to do authentic storytelling for diverse candidates, we're also here to support you in that. But with that, thank you, everyone.
Yes,
so what I'll do is stop my share and see if we have any questions. So Alex, we have a question. I don't know if you have the Q&A pulled up.
I do.
Perfect. So I'll let you answer that and read it out loud.
Okay. Do you believe an increase in virtual work will segue companies into not valuing DEI as much? How can we combat this? An increase in virtual not I don't. I think that because it is we're getting such a broader pool of talent, I think virtual work will actually increase the need for DEI programs within companies because they are touching a more diverse work base. I think that right now that's one of the only ways to succeed in this time of crisis is to broaden that horizon and make sure that you have a dedicated DEI program to support those new employees.
So I'm going to check the chat. If we have no more questions, I know we're about 30 minutes and I could probably talk to you for another hour about this topic, Alexandra, but we are kind of at time, so I'm just going to give everyone another second, see if there's any more questions. And if not, Alex and I can both be found on LinkedIn or Fairygodboss. So I hope you all found this insightful. There's a lot more detail to everything that we shared today, tons of research that we've read. So connect with us and
Yes, please
share all of
do.
that with everyone. So really
Please
appreciate
do.
it.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Marta.
Thank you and have a good day, everyone.